On most mornings, Henry Whitmore woke to silence that felt heavier than any boardroom he'd ever dominated. The clocks in his penthouse ticked too loudly. The city below moved without asking his permission. For a man who had once been able to pick up a phone and change the course of a company, the stillness of his 72-year-old life felt like an insult. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, joints protesting. The floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline. Glass, steel, the small rectangle of river in the distance. All of it, in one way or another, bore his fingerprints. Towers he'd financed. Blocks he'd bought, sold, gutted, polished. Still here, he muttered at his reflection in the wardrobe mirror. The silver at his temples had taken over years ago, but his posture was still straight, his jaw still hard. Money, he liked to joke, was nature's best painkiller. The joke landed in the empty room and went nowhere. By 10, he was dressed sharply as ever in a tailored navy blazer and press shirt, tie knotted just so. There were no meetings on his calendar. His assistant had timidly reminded him of that the day before, but he refused to surrender to sweatpants and daytime television. That, he believed, was how a man truly declared defeat. He dismissed the driver for the day and decided to walk. The autumn air outside was cool and clear, a thin wind tugging at the edges of his jacket. He took wide, confident strides down the avenue, ignoring the stiffness in his knee. People flowed around him, young professionals with coffee cups, retired couples holding hands, students with paint-smeared backpacks. He watched them with a mixture of superiority and something like envy. Halfway down Market Street, he noticed the crowd. White tents lined the sidewalks, a weekend art fair spilling out in both directions. Canvas after canvas leaned on easels. Tables were cluttered with pottery, handmade jewelry, jars of jam. A woman in a wool hat argued with a man about the price of a metal sculpture that looked like twisted cutlery. Henry almost kept walking. Street fairs were for tourists and people who pretended poverty was charming. But a flash of color at the far end of the row snagged his attention. A flower. He didn't know why his chest tightened just from that first glimpse. It was only paint on canvas, one more piece among dozens. Yet his feet, apparently ignoring him, slowed, then turned. He approached the stall. The painting was larger than he'd expected, nearly half his height. A single flower dominated the canvas, a climbing bloom, creamy white petals edged with faint blue, opening against a backdrop of dark, weathered brick. The brushstrokes around it were messy and impulsive, but the flower itself was rendered with startling tenderness, every curve of petal cupped in light. He knew that flower. Not the species, he'd long forgotten the botanical name, but the way it grew, the way it leaned toward the light. Moonflower, he thought, and the word rose up from some deep well inside him, carrying with it the scent of damp soil and summer rain.
His throat went dry.
A back porch, years ago. Rough wooden steps. A row of cracked clay pots they couldn't afford to replace. Her hands, small but stubborn, pressing seeds into the dirt with reverence, her hair pulled up and still a little too short from that reckless haircut she'd given herself. The two of them laughing because nothing they grew ever survived, except those flowers.
Leah.
The name struck him like a physical blow. 50 years vanished in an instant, swallowed by the sight of paint on canvas. He reached out, fingers hovering just shy of the surface, not daring to touch. Beautiful, isn't it? The voice belonged to a young man in a denim jacket, a volunteer badge pinned crookedly to his chest. He stood beside the stall, hands shoved into his pockets. That one gets the most people to stop. I keep telling her she should raise the price. Her. Henry's voice came out rougher than he intended. The artist.
Yeah.
She'll be back in a second, Rand, to get more change. The kid tilted his head, studying Henry's face with mild curiosity. You want me to hold it for you? Henry almost laughed. The idea that he needed someone to hold anything for him was faintly ridiculous. He had an entire legal team for that. Yet his hand tightened slightly around the handle of his cane. Who is she? He asked, forcing casualness into his tone. The artist. Name's Leah Hart, the young man said. She's local. Been part of the market for years now. The world narrowed to that single name. Henry felt a cold, sharp sensation start somewhere near his ribs and spread outward. He told himself it was indigestion. Walking this far without the car had been foolish. The city air wasn't what it used to be. Any explanation, really, except the obvious one. Leah Hart can't be the same woman, he thought. People change their hair, their clothes. They don't keep the same name and the same flower for half a century. Except maybe they did. Leah, he repeated, as if testing the word for cracks. Interesting. He straightened a little, rolling his shoulders back. Instinctively, he put on the old armor, the cool voice, the small twist of the mouth that made everything and everyone look slightly beneath him. His heartbeat, however, had abandoned that script and was pounding unevenly in his chest. He studied the painting again. The flower erupted from a narrow strip of soil crammed between bricks, stubborn, luminous. Someone had painted this from memory, not reference photos. Someone who had loved it once.
Well,
if it was her, that would be amusing. He could handle amusing. He heard her before he saw her. The soft clink of coins, the rustle of a paper bag. "Sorry I took so long, Eli," a woman said, voice faintly breathless. The line was. She stepped into view, and time did something strange. The years had left their mark, silver threaded through her hair, faint lines tracing the corners of her eyes and mouth. Her figure was fuller, her movements slower. But the tilt of her head, the way she held the paper bag against her chest, even the small frown as she caught sight of a crooked frame, those were unchanged.
Leah.
The young man lifted a hand. "Hey, someone's interested in the moonflower." She turned toward Henry. Her gaze met his. He watched the recognition hit her in stages. First, confusion of polite, neutral curiosity for a stranger. Then a flicker of something else, something startled and sharp, like someone opening a familiar drawer and finding a knife inside. Her fingers tightened around the bag, crinkling the paper. It lasted only a heartbeat. Then her face smoothed over, the way one might smooth a tablecloth over a damaged table. Her lips curved into a small, practiced smile. "Good afternoon," she said. "Are you thinking of buying the piece?" Her voice was carefully light, perfectly ordinary. It might have fooled anyone else. But Henry saw the tiny tremor in the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. He saw the way her eyes refused to fully rest on his face, always skimming just a little to the side. And he saw the tear. It gathered quietly at the corner of her eye as she blinked, then slid down, leaving a shining path over the soft creases of her cheek. She did not wipe it away. Henry's fingers tightened on the handle of his cane. For a moment, the air felt too thin. "Well," he said, and heard too much smoothness in his own voice, like oil on water. "Depends. Are you giving old friends a discount these days, Leah?" The name came out before he could stop it. She flinched the slightest bit at hearing it from his mouth. Her eyes finally focused on him, really focused, tracing the map of his face. The years between them hung in that gaze. Years of distance, of unanswered questions, of letters packed away in a shoebox or perhaps torn to pieces. He drew himself up, masking the rawness with the same overconfidence that had once made him unbearable and irresistible in equal measure. "It's been a long time," he added, as if they were casual acquaintances bumping into each other at the grocery store, not people who had once planned to grow old together on a porch full of flowers. "Has it?" she asked softly. Her lips curved again, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. Another tear escaped, slower this time. She blinked, finally brushing her cheek with the back of her hand as if the wind had done something rude. Eli glanced between them, sensing something he didn't understand. "You two know each other?" "We used to," Henry said, before Leah could answer. He let out a short, confident laugh, the kind that suggested he looked back on everything with easy nostalgia. "Ancient history. I'm surprised you remember me at all, Leah. Life gets so crowded, doesn't it?" Her gaze hardened for a fraction of a second. It was only a flicker, but he caught it. "Oh," she said. "Some memories are persistent." There it was, an edge, thin as the line of a knife. He felt oddly relieved to hear it. Indifference would have been worse. He gestured toward the painting. This is yours, then? Still growing those stubborn things, I see. For a while, she replied. Her fingers relaxed a little on the paper bag. When there wasn't enough room for the real ones, I kept them here. She tapped lightly at her temple. He wondered if she knew she'd just admitted something vulnerable. She seemed to realize it a beat later. Her posture straightened, voice turning brisk. Are you interested in purchasing it, mister? Whitmore, he supplied. Henry Whitmore. Recognition flickered again, different this time. The name meant something now beyond the young man she'd once known. It was on buildings, in newspapers, whispered about in the business sections and charity galas. Of course, she said quietly. I've seen your name. He smiled, and there was a hint of boast in it, something careless. Hard to miss, I suppose. The moment the words left his mouth, he felt the pettiness of them, but he didn't pull them back. Habit was a powerful thing. Whenever he felt unsteady, he reached for the same old shield, arrogance polished to a shine. Leon nodded once.
Well,
the moonflower's not priced yet. I hadn't decided if I wanted to sell it. You should, he said. Every piece has its price. He took out his wallet, the gesture smooth, automatic. Name it. The young man's eyebrows rose. Leah's eyes darkened, not with awe at his money, but with something closer to fatigue.
Some things don't, she said.
Or shouldn't. Their gazes locked again. For a second, the noise of the market receded, the chatter, the distant music, the clatter of a dropped mug somewhere behind them. Henry's heart thudded once, hard. He could say something now. Something honest, out of character. He could ask why she was crying. He could apologize for a porch long gone, for a night when he'd said unforgivable things and walked away before listening. Instead, he heard himself say lightly, sentimental as always. The words landed between them like a small, cruel stone. Her mouth tightened, but she let out a soft, almost amused breath. And you, she replied, haven't changed as much as you think. Eli shifted awkwardly. I'm gonna go check on the tent down the row, he mumbled, backing away. Call me if you need help, Leah. They didn't watch him go. Henry slid his wallet back into his pocket, shrugging as if it didn't matter either way. If you decide to part with it, let me know, he said. I like the flower. Reminds me of simpler landscaping. Her eyes searched his face for a moment, as if she were trying to see whether there was anything left of the boy who had once needed soil beside her, complaining about dirt under his nails, and then staying until midnight to move pots when the rain came. If I decide, she said, I'll let you know. He cleared his throat. Perhaps we could catch up. Coffee, maybe. For old time's sake.
There.
Friendly, confident, nothing too serious. He half expected her to leap at the suggestion, to show that after all these years, he still had the same pull. Instead, she hesitated. Her gaze dropped to the painting, then to her hands. When she looked back up, her eyes were steady, tears dried, but leaving their faint path. I have a lot of work here, she said. The fair runs all weekend. We'll see. We'll see. He told himself it was an opening. It was better than no. The old arrogance, worn, but not yet broken, whispered that she was only protecting herself, that once she had time to think, she'd remember who he was, what he could offer, how easily he'd always made decisions for both of them. He smiled, that smooth, careless smile he'd worn in every negotiation. Then I'll come back, he said. I'm not difficult to find. I know, she murmured. He turned away, walking back into the stream of people, the noise of the market rising around him again. His steps were confident, measured. To any passerby, he looked like a man who had everything under control. But halfway down the row, he stopped and glanced back over his shoulder. Leah stood very still beside her painting, one hand resting lightly on the edge of the canvas. Her head was bowed in a way that made it impossible to see her expression. For a moment, she looked small against the big, demanding presence of her own work. The moonflower on the canvas seemed to glow, stubbornly bright against the dark brick. Henry swallowed, feeling the echo of soil beneath his fingers and the sound of a young woman's laughter on a long-lost summer night. Then he set his jaw, straightened his shoulders, and moved on, telling himself that he was simply curious, nothing more. That old stories were only that, stories. Behind him, at the stall on Market Street, a woman wiped away a final stray tear, lifted her chin, and began to rearrange her paintings as if a ghost had not just walked out of her life and back into it on the same afternoon. Leah did not move for a long time after Henry disappeared into the crowd. People passed in front of her stall, slowing to glance at the paintings, some pausing, some smiling politely, some drifting on without seeing anything. She kept her hands busy, straightening frames, adjusting price tags, refolding the same stack of flyers 3 times. Anything to keep her fingers from trembling. The market sounds returned gradually. The squeal of a child at the balloon vendor, a busker's guitar, the faint hum of traffic beyond the tents. Life, indifferent to whoever, had just walked back into it. Eli came back with 2 coffees, noticing the stiffness in her shoulders immediately. "Hey," he said softly, pressing a cup into her hand. "You okay?" She forced herself to take a sip. The coffee was too sweet. Her heart was already racing.
"Fine," she said.
"Just a bit of a surprise." "The guy with the cane?" Eli leaned against the tent pole, watching her face. "You looked like you'd seen a ghost." "In a way," she murmured. She thought of the last time she'd seen Henry, decades ago. Not in a market, but in a cramped kitchen that smelled of burned toast and cheap coffee. His suitcase by the door. His voice raised, sharp with impatience. The words he'd hurled at her, words he'd never taken back because he'd never written again. "You don't understand how small this is. I can't stay stuck here with your little dreams." She had replayed that scene more times than she could count. In some versions, she shouted back. In others, she threw the mug, watched it shatter. In reality, she'd stood very still and let him walk away. "Did he bother you?" Eli asked. The protective note in his voice brought her back to the present. "No," she said quickly. Then, after a moment, "Not exactly." Eli studied her for another long second, then nodded. "Well, if he comes back and you want me to run interference, say the word." "Interference," she repeated, a small smile tugging at her mouth despite herself. "What are you, my bodyguard now?" He shrugged. "I carry heavy paintings and yell at people who try to bargain you down to nothing. It's a start." She laughed quietly, the sound easing some of the tightness in her chest. Eli patted the tent pole and headed off to help another artist set up a fallen easel. Alone again, Leah turned back to the moonflower painting. The flowers seemed different now, though she knew that was impossible. Same strokes, same layers of oil and glaze. But she could not look at it without also seeing Henry's face superimposed, older and sharper than the last time she'd known it, his eyes carrying a weight that hadn't been there when they were both young and invincible. "Sentimental, as always," he'd said. All these years, she had imagined meeting him again. In those imagined scenarios, she was always composed, a little amused, distant. She made clever remarks. She let him see how well she'd done without him. Instead, the first thing she'd done was cry. Just 1 tear, but it felt like a betrayal of every quiet promise she'd made to herself when she'd finally stopped waiting for his letters. She set her coffee down and reached for the small, not for sale, tag she kept for the few pieces she couldn't let go of. Her fingers hovered over the string, then withdrew. If she labeled it, she knew, she was admitting that it still belonged to something unfinished between them. And she was too old to keep unfinished business hanging over her head like a storm that refused to break. With a soft sigh, she left the painting untagged. Henry's evening should have been full. There was a charity dinner scheduled, the kind of event where his presence alone encouraged other rich men to loosen their wallets. His assistant had texted twice, reminding him that the foundation would appreciate a brief speech. He'd been meant to review a stack of documents about a new development project before that. Instead, he sat in his leather armchair, the city lights winking at him through the window, and stared at a blank page in front of him. He had taken out stationery on a whim, the heavy cream kind he rarely used anymore in the age of email and text messages. The pen hovered over the paper. Dear Leah. The words looked ridiculous as soon as he'd written them. He crossed them out. Ms. Hart. Worse. Cold and formal, as if she were a stranger whose portfolio he was considering. He tossed the pen onto the desk and leaned back, pressing the heels of his hands against his eyes. Why did it matter what he wrote? Why did it matter at all? He'd made peace, hadn't he, with the choices of his youth? That was what he told himself whenever regret tried to gnaw at him. You did what you had to do, Henry. You got out.
You built something.
You won. Yet when he thought of winning, the image that came to mind now was a flower in a chipped clay pot and a girl kneeling next to it, dirt on her knees, laughing as she scolded him for overwatering. She'd always believed in things that took time, plants, paintings, people. He believed in acceleration, in shortcuts, in moving so fast that nothing could catch him. Not doubt, not guilt, not the sound of someone calling his name as he walked away. He exhaled slowly, letting his hands fall. Part of him had wanted her not to recognize him at the market. That would have been simpler. He could have bought the painting, made some dry remark, and left with a memory safely pressed between the pages of his mind like one of those flowers she used to dry in old books. Instead, she had seen him, and something in her had cracked open just for a second. That single tear had done what the rising and falling stock markets never had. It had made him feel out of control. He hated that feeling. His phone buzzed on the desk. He glanced at the screen. A message from his assistant, attaching his prepared talking points for the charity dinner and asking if he wanted the car brought around. Henry picked up the device, typed, "I'm not coming tonight." Something came up. He sent it before he could reconsider. Then he stood, reached for his jacket, and told himself that going back to the fair was simply a matter of curiosity. He wanted the painting, that was all. The flower belonged with him now. It was a relic from a life he had paid too high a price to not own completely. The market was quieter in the evening. Some stalls had closed, their owners packing boxes into vans. Strings of lights flicked on one by one, casting a warm glow over the remaining tents. The air had turned cooler, carrying the smell of roasted chestnuts from a nearby cart. Leah was rubbing her hands together for warmth when she saw him. He moved more slowly now, the cane tapping a steady rhythm as he approached. People parted around him in the unconscious way they always seemed to, sensing money and self-assurance even if they didn't know his name. She squared her shoulders, resisting the urge to fuss with her hair. "You came back," she said, keeping her voice neutral. "I did say I'm not difficult to find." He stopped in front of the moonflower painting again, studying it with intensity he used to reserve for financial reports. "I've been thinking about it. I'd like to buy it." She raised an eyebrow. "Of course you have." He ignored the faint rebuke. "Name your price." She could have named a number that would make Eli's jaw drop. It would hardly dent Henry's fortune. She knew that much from the articles she'd read over the years, the ones she pretended didn't interest her. A part of her was tempted, if only to prove that the value of her work was something he had to acknowledge now. But another part recoiled at the idea of him taking this particular piece away, locking it behind some apartment door high above the city, where it would become just another acquisition in a life built on acquisition. "No," she said simply. His head snapped toward her, surprised. "No." "No," she repeated. "It's not for sale." "That wasn't what you told me earlier." "Earlier," she said, "I hadn't decided yet." He studied her face, searching for the weakness, the angle to press. It was instinctive, the way he approached every negotiation. Find the soft spot, apply pressure, seal the deal. "I can offer more than anyone else here," he said. "A lot more." "I'm sure you can." Her voice remained calm. "That's not the point." "What is the point, then?" He gestured at the painting. "You bring something you won't sell to a market that exists to sell things? That seems sentimental," she supplied, a small glint in her eyes. He closed his mouth, recognizing his own word thrown back at him. For a heartbeat, the corner of his mouth twitched, almost amused. Then the old irritation surfaced. Irritation at being deflected, at not being immediately accommodated. "You always did like making simple things complicated," he said. And you always liked pretending complicated things were simple, she replied without heat. They stood there, decades of habit sliding into place, the push and pull, his impatience, her stubbornness. It felt uncomfortably familiar. Someone wandered up to the stall, glanced between them, then decided to come back later. The air hummed with the things neither of them were saying. We could talk about it, Henry said finally, softening his tone by a fraction. Over dinner, perhaps. Or coffee, if you don't trust me not to poison your soup. Her lips curved despite herself. I don't think you ever wanted to poison anyone. You just didn't mind stepping over them. The words were quiet, but they landed sharp. His jaw tightened. You don't know the half of what I've. He stopped himself. He had been about to talk about sacrifice, about clawing his way up from nothing, about people who'd lied to him and partners who'd left him stranded. All the stories he used to justify the hardness he wore like armor. But the look in her eyes said she did know, at least some of it. She'd been there for the beginning, before he'd traded shared dreams for skyscrapers. I know you left, she said instead, saving him from the rant. I know you chose what you chose. And I know I'm not going to hand you this painting just because you're used to getting what you want. There it was, the line she was drawing for both of them. Henry's chest constricted. Pride rose instinctively, offended. He had come here twice in one day, rearranged his schedule, risked feeling like a fool, and she was refusing him. It's just a painting, he said coldly. Her eyes softened in a way that made him even more uncomfortable. No, Henry, she murmured. It's 50 years. For a moment, neither spoke. He felt something unfamiliar then, not the sharp anger that came when a deal soured, not the smooth detachment he wore at parties. It was closer to humiliation, tinged with an ache he refused to name. He straightened, clinging to what he knew best. Suit yourself, he said. It's your loss. She smiled faintly. Maybe. But at least it's my choice. He looked away first, gaze snagging on another canvas, a street at night, rain-slicked pavement reflecting neon signs. Her style had grown since the last time he'd seen her draw on napkins and scrap paper. There was confidence in the brushwork, a quiet authority that had nothing to do with money. Your work is good, he said abruptly, surprising both of them. Better than most of what hangs in galleries I've funded. She blinked. For the first time that day, her composure wavered in a different direction. Thank you, she said, genuine warmth flickering in her voice. He seized on it, relieved to be back on ground that felt less like confession. If you're interested in a proper exhibition, I know people. There's a space on River Street that could. No, she interrupted, shaking her head. Not like that. Not like what? With strings attached. Her gaze met his steadily. I've built this slowly, Henry. Students, small shows, pieces sold one by one. If I move to some big gallery now because a millionaire decided to fix things for me, it won't feel like mine. The word millionaire had a tiny barb to it. He heard it. I'm offering you an opportunity most people would. Most people aren't me, she said quietly. And you don't get to atone by rewriting my life into something that fits your narrative. He flinched inwardly, though his expression only tightened by a degree. It hadn't occurred to him that she might see his offer as anything but generous. Yet, of course, she would view it through the lens of the boy who had once told her her dreams were too small. I didn't come here to atone, he said, hearing the lie even as he spoke it. I came because I like your work. That's all. If that's true, she replied, then you can come back tomorrow, browse like anyone else, and let the painting stay where it is for now. It felt like a dismissal. He opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. She was watching him with a mixture of wariness and something gentler, sadness, maybe. Expectation, in the slightest sense. She was waiting to see which version of him would win. The one who always pushed harder, or someone he wasn't sure he knew how to be. Fine, he said at last, forcing the word out. I'll be back tomorrow. Maybe I will too, she said lightly, and the joke, thin as it was, made the tension loosen by a thread. He turned to go. As he walked away, the frustration hummed under his skin, but so did something else, a strange, restless anticipation. She hadn't given him what he wanted. She hadn't folded. And somehow, incredibly, that made him want to see her again even more. Behind him, Liao watched his figure retreat into the evening light. Her heart was beating too fast for a woman her age. She pressed a hand to her chest, giving herself a moment, then reached for her notebook and wrote, in small neat letters on the back of a receipt, "Don't let history repeat itself." She slipped the note into her pocket like a talisman. And yet, when the lights of the market reflected off the moonflower's painted petals, she couldn't deny the tiny spark inside her, a part of her that was curious, against her better judgment, about who Henry Whitmore had become and what, exactly, he was doing back in her life. The next morning, Liao woke before her alarm. For a moment she lay still, listening to the small sounds of her apartment, the fridge humming, a car rolling past outside, the faint creak of pipes in the wall. Her knees ached a little, and her back protested the way it always did after a long day standing at the stall. It should have been an ordinary morning, but as she stared at the ceiling, a single thought rose to the surface before everything else. Will he come back? She exhaled sharply, annoyed at herself. At her age, she told her students, life was best when it wasn't waiting on what other people would or wouldn't do. And here she was, heart beating faster over the possibility of a man appearing at an art fair. A man she had once vowed never to think about again. She shuffled to the kitchen and made tea instead of coffee. It felt like a small act of defiance against the way her nerves were buzzing. While the kettle boiled, her eyes drifted to the corner of the living room where a single pot sat on the windowsill. A moonflower vine climbed the trellis she'd wedged into the soil, still mostly leaves this early in the season. Only one pale bud had opened the night before, its petals already thinning at the edges. Fragile, persistent, refusing to give up even when the city lights drowned out the stars. "Don't look at me like that," she muttered to the plant, surprising herself with a laugh. "I'm not the one clinging to the past." But she touched one of the leaves gently before she turned away. On Market Street, the air was brisk but bright. Liao arrived early, as usual, arranging her canvases with practiced care. The moonflower painting took its place at the center, anchored by smaller pieces on either side. She hesitated, then taped a small handwritten sign below it. Not for sale, for exhibit only. She stepped back, arms folded, and nodded to herself. It was a boundary and she needed it. Eli appeared a little after 9, carrying a cardboard tray of coffees and a bag that smelled like cinnamon. "You're early," he said. "Couldn't sleep?" "Too much tea," she replied. He handed her a cup and peered at the sign beneath the moonflower. "Finally decided?" "For now," she said. "For your peace of mind," he said, "I vote indefinitely." She was about to answer when a voice floated over the murmur of the crowd. "Good morning. I see the exhibit has a new policy." Henry. He stood a few steps away from the stall, wearing a charcoal coat today, his scarf knotted with the kind of care that said someone somewhere had once been paid to do it for him. His cane planted neatly at his side, he looked both distinguished and slightly out of place in the scruffy charm of the market. Leah's heart kicked once hard. She felt it, acknowledged it, and then deliberately set her coffee down before facing him. "We cater to serious art lovers," she said, "not impulse buyers." Eli glanced between them, then muttered something about checking the other tent lines and quietly vanished. Henry stepped closer, eyes scanning the sign. "Not for sale," he read aloud. "I see I've had an effect." "Don't flatter yourself," she replied, though the corner of her mouth betrayed a hint of a smile. "I slept on it. Decided I'd rather keep this one a little longer." His gaze lingered on her face for a beat too long, as if looking for proof that she had in fact slept. She looked tired, he thought, lines a little deeper, eyes shadowed, but there was a steadiness around her that hadn't been there when they were young and scrambling. A self that no longer bent as easily. "Fair enough," he said. "I'll simply have to admire it in public like everyone else." "Imagine," she said lightly, "you and everyone else wanting the same thing and not being able to buy it. The world must feel strange." He almost laughed. "You always did enjoy lecturing me. You always needed it." They fell quiet for a moment, the old rhythm of barbs and warmth threading between them in a way that felt disturbingly natural. A couple stopped in front of the stall, exclaiming softly over a painting of a foggy bridge. Leah slipped easily into her role, answering their questions, discussing technique, price, delivery options. Henry watched her work. He'd seen her talk about art before, decades ago, when it was just her and a sketchbook and dreams bigger than their one-bedroom apartment. But this was different. There was authority in her tone, the unhurried confidence of someone who'd put in years without shortcuts. She looked at ease in her skin in a way he'd never learned to be in his. The couple bought a smaller piece and left, promising to come back next week. Leah wrote the receipt with careful, looping script. "You've built a world here," Henry said quietly when they were alone again. "Looks solid." "It's not a conglomerate," she replied. "But it's mine." He nodded once. The admission slipped out before he could stop it. "I'm impressed." Her eyes flicked to his, surprised by the sincerity in his tone. For a second, the tension between them thinned, revealing the simple truth. They had both grown into older versions of themselves, carrying all the ordinary aches and extraordinary regrets that time handed out. "Would you like to sit?" she asked finally. "You look like you're pretending your knee doesn't hurt." He stiffened. "It's fine." "Your jaw tightens every third step when it's not fine," she said. "Some tells don't change." He stared at her. Then, to his own astonishment, he chuckled. "You kept count." She pulled a folding chair out from behind the table and tapped it. "Sit, Henry, before you topple over and sue the market." He lowered himself onto the chair with more gratitude than he'd admit. The relief in his knee was immediate. He kept his posture straight, cane balanced against his leg, trying not to look like he needed the rest. "Do you have time for a break?" he asked. "There's a cafe at the corner. I could buy you a coffee. Or tea, if you've become refined." She considered it. The old instinct was to say no, to keep the distance safe. But another part of her, older, tired of avoiding shadows, whispered that one coffee would not undo 50 years of work on herself. "I have 10 minutes, she said. "Eli can watch the stall." He looked genuinely pleased, which unsettled her more than his arrogance ever had. 10 minutes, he agreed. "I'll try not to ruin your life in that time." "Try harder than last time," she said, picking up her coat. The cafe at the corner was small and warm, its walls lined with mismatched frames holding local artists' work. Leah knew the woman behind the counter by name. They exchanged a quick, familiar smile. Henry paid without comment, though his hand lingered for a second on the tip jar, overfilling it with an absent-minded generosity that startled even him. They settled at a table by the window. Outside, the tents of the market were visible, little white triangles against the bright sky. "So," Henry began, stirring a sugar packet into his coffee, though he usually took it black. "What have you been doing these last 50 years, besides sabotaging rich men's attempts to buy your paintings?" "Growing up," she said. "Eventually. Teaching. Painting. Losing people. Finding others. You know, the usual." He winced slightly. "I'm sorry about whoever you lost." "My parents," she said. "A few friends. My patience with idiotic men." The last was delivered dryly enough that he wasn't sure whether to smile. "I suppose I'm on that list," he said. "You're the cover illustration," she replied. He let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "Fair. What about you?" she asked after a moment. "Besides putting your name on tall buildings and scaring assistants?" He shrugged, looking out the window. "Work. More work. A brief marriage that looked good in magazines and felt like a business merger. No children. Unless you count companies." She studied his profile. There was no self-pity in his voice, but also no pride, not the kind she remembered from his younger self, who'd been so certain that success would fix everything. "And do they love you back?" she asked softly. "Your companies?" The question slipped under his defenses like a blade made of silk. He stared at her, then laughed, but the sound was brittle. "I suppose not," he admitted. "They behave as long as I keep feeding them, like badly trained dogs. Or executives." He shrugged. "Either way, they don't look at me the way you did when those stupid seeds finally sprouted." She hadn't expected him to say that. Heat rose in her face. She wrapped both hands around her cup to ground herself. Henry, she warned gently, don't do that. Do what? Reach back into the past and pluck out the sweetest moment just because you're uncomfortable in the present, she said. It's not a flower on a shelf. It's a whole life you walked away from. He leaned back, her accuracy stinging. You really haven't forgiven me, he said. I forgave the boy you were a long time ago, she replied. I just don't trust the man you became. The simplicity of it landed with more force than any accusation. He opened his mouth to argue that he'd done what he'd had to, that she'd had no idea how small the town had felt around his throat, that he'd meant to come back and explain, but the first big deal had swallowed him whole. Then he saw the tired acceptance in her eyes and felt, for a moment, very old. I don't expect trust overnight, he said finally. The admission tasted strange. I don't know if I deserve it, honestly, but I'd like the chance to earn something. She watched him, searching for the usual swagger, the rehearsed charm. There was still plenty of pride there, but she could also see the effort it cost him to say those last words. Something like, she asked. I don't know, he said, impatience flickering then subsiding. Conversation. The right to visit your stall without you wishing for lightning. A second chance not to be the villain in your head every time you look at a moonflower. Her fingers tightened around the cup. The phrase second chance made something twist inside her, equal parts hope and warning. You might still end up the villain, she said. I usually do, he answered dryly. She smiled despite herself. It wasn't the easy, naive smile she'd once given him. It was smaller, edged with caution. But it was real. 10 minutes are up, she said, glancing at the clock. I have customers to charm. And paintings to hoard, he added, standing with a soft grunt. As they stepped back into the street, she felt the old, familiar danger, the way his presence pulled at her, even now. But she also felt the lines she'd drawn inside herself, the years that lay between them like a river she'd learned to cross alone. At the stall, a man in a dark green coat was studying the moonflower painting, his hands clasped behind his back. He was around their age, with kind eyes and a thoughtful set to his mouth. This is remarkable, the man murmured to Eli, who'd reappeared. There's something tender in it. Who painted this? My mentor, Eli said proudly. Leah, she's right here. Leah stepped forward, Henry a half step behind her. The man turned, and his gaze lit up when he saw her. You must be Leah Hart, he said, extending a hand. I've been hearing about your work for months at the gallery. I'm Daniel Cole. Henry watched as Leah's fingers slid into the other man's handshake. Daniel's grip was firm but gentle, his smile open, entirely lacking the wary calculation Henry was used to seeing in the eyes of people who knew his net worth. That piece, Daniel continued, nodding at the moonflower. It stays with you. I'd like to talk about featuring it in a special collection. If you're willing. Leah's pulse jumped. Henry felt the ground shift almost imperceptibly beneath them. The story, it seemed, was about to get more complicated. Daniel's hand was warm, his grip steady. Leah felt the difference immediately. Henry's presence at her side was all sharp corners and tension. Daniel's was quiet, like the soft hum of a well-tuned engine you only noticed when it stopped. His dark green coat was flecked with a few drops of paint, as if he'd brushed against a wet canvas earlier, without caring. I helped curate a small gallery on River Street, he was saying. We've been talking about putting together a series on memory and place. Your moonflower piece, he glanced back at the painting, almost reverent. It feels like the heart of it. Leah's instinctive response was to deflect praise. Years of working in the margins had taught her to understate. It's just something I painted one winter when the real flowers refused to bloom. And somehow, Daniel said, you made them bloom anyway. Henry shifted beside her. A gallery on River Street, he cut in, his tone light but edged. I know that building. Leaky roof. Bad insulation. Daniel looked over, taking Henry in properly for the first time. Leah saw the flicker of recognition, the way his brows lifted slightly. You must be Mr. Whitmore, he said. I've seen your name on more than one donor plaque. I get around, Henry replied. You're Daniel Cole. No fluster, no awe. Just a polite nod. I run Cole and Hartman Investments by day and spend the rest of my time pretending I'm useful in the art world. Another millionaire, Leah thought dimly. Different cut of cloth, same tax bracket. Aloud, she said, Daniel collects work from local artists. He bought 2 of Eli's pieces last year. There was appreciation in her voice. Henry heard it like a grain of sand in his shoe. I try, Daniel said. Mostly I get in the way and ask questions. But your work. His eyes returned to Leah. I'd like to do more than buy it. I'd like other people to see it. Henry's jaw tightened. She doesn't need a patron, he said. If Leah wants exposure, I can. She didn't say she needed one, Daniel replied mildly. I'm offering a collaboration. His tone was courteous, but there was a line drawn in it. He hadn't raised his voice, yet somehow Henry felt himself pushed back a step. Leah intervened before the air thickened further. Why don't we talk about it later? She suggested. I don't decide where my work goes in the middle of the street. Of course, Daniel said. I didn't mean to ambush you. He reached into his coat and took out a card, sliding it onto the table. If you're interested, perhaps you could come by the gallery tomorrow afternoon. No pressure. Just a conversation. His gaze flicked briefly to Henry. You'd be welcome too, Mr. Whitmore. We never turn down people who care about art. Henry smiled, all polished urbanity. I care about many things, he said. Art is occasionally one of them. Daniel's eyes crinkled at the corners. That's more than most people can say about anything. He tipped an invisible hat to Leah. Hope to see you tomorrow. Then he moved on to the next stall, pausing to admire a line of ceramic bowls. Leah exhaled slowly. He seems very pleased with himself, Henry said. He seems kind, she replied. Kindness won't fix a leaking roof. Money can, she said. But that's not the only thing that matters. His mouth flattened. She could almost see the conflict rise in him, the urge to belittle, to dismiss, to reassert himself as the largest presence in any room. So, he said, You'll go? To the gallery? She asked. I might. You don't need him to discover you, Henry said. You've already done the hard part. I could call 3 curators before lunch who'd give you a bigger platform then. Henry. Her voice was gentle but firm. This isn't about being discovered. I'm not 21 anymore, desperate for someone to tell me I'm special. I want to choose who I work with, not be launched like a product. He looked stung. That's not what I meant. It's what you've always meant, she thought, but she didn't say it. Instead, she reached for a brush, pretending to adjust a small landscape while her heart thudded. If you want to come tomorrow, she said, come as someone who likes art, not as someone who thinks he can own it. He opened his mouth, then shut it again. Pride warred with something softer in his eyes. I'll see what I can manage, he said, which in his language meant, I hate being given terms, but I hate the idea of not showing up more. The gallery on River Street smelled faintly of dust, coffee, and old wood. Leah liked it immediately. It occupied the ground floor of a brick building that had seen better days, with tall windows that let in generous light and scuffed floors that told stories about decades of footsteps. A row of track lights hummed softly overhead, aimed at canvases waiting for their turn on the walls. Daniel greeted her at the door, his expression brightening in a way that made her chest tighten unexpectedly. You came, he said. I was afraid I'd scared you off with all that talk of themes and collections. You offered free coffee, she said, stepping inside. I'm a simple woman. He smiled. I doubt that very much. He showed her around, pointing out the work of other local artists, the schedule for upcoming shows, the fragile finances of a space that survived more on passion than profit. Leah listened, asking precise, thoughtful questions. This, she realized, was where she felt most herself, among canvases and people who spoke the language of color and memory. We could build the whole center of the exhibit around that moonflower piece, Daniel said, stopping in front of an empty wall. Stories of things that survive where they shouldn't. People carry those images with them. Especially, he hesitated, people our age. She looked at the bare wall, imagining her painting there. Not hidden in someone's private collection, but shared, seen by strangers who might also carry their own old wounds and quiet hopes. I don't want to lose control of it, she said softly. Of any of it. I spent too many years waiting for someone else to decide my work mattered. Daniel nodded. Then don't lose control. We'll sign a contract that states exactly what you want. Length of exhibit, insurance value, reproduction rights. Nothing happens without your consent. You sound like a lawyer, she said. Investment firms breed them like mushrooms, he replied. I escaped mostly, but I picked up a few useful tricks on the way out. She studied him. You walked away from the climb? In a fashion, he said. There are only so many boardrooms you can sit in before you realize you're talking to the same four men in different suits. The gallery, it makes less money, but it makes more sense. He said it without self-pity, just a quiet certainty that appealed to something in her. He had chosen to step sideways instead of only forward. That mattered. The door opened, letting in a gust of cooler air and a familiar rhythm. Tap, step, tap.
Henry.
He paused just inside, looking around with an expression that tried to be indifferent and landed somewhere closer to grudging respect. Interesting place, he said. Charming, if you like exposed wiring. Good afternoon to you too, Daniel said, amused. You found us. Well, my driver did, Henry replied. But I'm capable of getting out of the car on my own. Leah felt the tension ripple under her skin. The two men regarded each other like chess pieces moving into position. We were just talking about the exhibit, she said, breaking the stare. Memory and place. Doesn't get more memorable than that painting, Daniel said. It's the only flower I've seen that looks like it's about to tell me a secret. Henry's mouth twitched. Careful. She might charge you extra for poetic interpretations.
She should, Daniel said.
They're worth something. There was no sarcasm in his voice. He meant it. Henry heard that, and for a moment, he wanted to like the man. It would be easier if he were obviously awful. Instead, he was what? Decent. Attentive. Different. Have you thought about representation? Daniel asked Leah. We're small, but we choose carefully. I'd like to handle the sales of your work in the city. She doesn't need a handler, Henry said crisply. One of her strengths is that she's independent. Leah stared at him. Since when have you cared about my independence? Since you built something without me, and I'm trying to pretend that doesn't unsettle me, he thought, but what he said was, since I've seen too many people sign away control for the sake of a bit of attention. Daniel raised his hands. It wouldn't be a prison contract, Mr. Whitmore. I'm not in the habit of chaining artists to radiators. Henry, Leah said. Stop. He shut his mouth, surprised. The word landed like a small slap. She turned to Daniel. Can you send me the terms in writing? I want to look them over. Maybe show them to a friend who reads contracts more patiently than I do. Of course, Daniel said at once. Take all the time you need. I didn't build this place to rush people into anything. He smiled. Especially not people who paint like you do. His admiration was open, uncalculated. Leah felt it settle around her like gentle warmth, so different from the spotlight glare of Henry's attention. When Daniel stepped away to answer a call, the gallery felt suddenly smaller. You like him, Henry said quietly. She didn't pretend to misunderstand. I respect him. That's not what I ask. She hesitated. Honesty pulled at her. So did the instinct to protect herself. I'm curious, she admitted. He sees my work in a way that makes me see it differently. That matters. And you trust him with it, Henry said, hearing the indictment underneath. More than you. She didn't answer. Jealousy was not an emotion Henry was used to entertaining. He'd spent his life as the man in the room other men envied. He did not enjoy the inversion. It clawed at his composure, made his next words come out sharper than they needed to. Be careful, he said. Men who run two lives, investment and art savior, usually love the image more than the people. She turned, anger flickering. You mean men like you? He flinched. That's not. You walked into my life today and decided who's a danger and who isn't, she went on, voice low but controlled. You don't get to do that anymore. You forfeited that right when you packed your suitcase and told me my world was too small. Silence settled between them. A door at the back clicked. Someone moved in a distant room. Dust motes drifted in the light.
He could have backed down then.
Apologized properly, acknowledged that he was out of line. For a heartbeat, the words even rose to his tongue. Instead, he reached for the old weapon: arrogance. I'm trying to protect you, he said, whether you see that or not. Her laugh was short and incredulous. From what? The possibility that someone might support my work without needing to own me. That's not what this is about, he insisted. You're letting him in too fast. You don't know what he wants.
And you do? She asked.
You've known him for half an hour. I know his type. Her eyes hardened. No, Henry. You know your type. The man who can't walk into a room without deciding which part of it belongs to him. The words hit him like a thrown stone. He straightened, offended, defensive. I've spent my life building something real. Forgive me if I don't trust men who float between hobbies. The contempt in hobbies made her stomach turn. This gallery isn't a hobby, she said. It's work. It's community. It's people who show up for each other when the roof leaks. She gestured toward the uneven floorboards, the scuffed walls. This place may not bear your name, but it's held more souls than any of your towers. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Pride would not let him concede. He felt cornered, and when cornered, he lashed out. If you'd let me in earlier, he said, none of this would be so small. You could have had a real space years ago. The second the words left him, he knew they were poison. He saw them land in her eyes, the echo of every time he'd called her dreams little and her world small. Slowly, she stepped back. Thank you, she said, voice suddenly cold, for reminding me exactly who you are when you feel threatened. Leah, that's not. No, she held up a hand. I've spent a lifetime learning to hear what people say when they're angry. That's when the truth leaks out. He reached for her arm, stopped himself just short. I didn't mean. Yes, you did, she said quietly. Maybe not with your head, but your heart believes it. You still think anything that isn't built your way doesn't count. He stared at her, something brittle cracking inside. A part of him wanted to shout, to tell her about the nights he'd slept in cheap motels, the deals that had gone bad, the humiliation of being dismissed by men who wore better suits. But he knew, beneath all that she was right. Even now, his first instinct was to measure worth in size and shine. Daniel's footsteps approached. Everything okay? He asked lightly, sensing the lingering electricity in the air. Leah forced herself to breathe. We were just finishing an old argument, she said. One that never really ended.
Ah.
Daniel's eyes flicked between them, understanding more than they said. Old arguments have teeth. Henry straightened, armor sliding back into place. You two clearly have a lot to discuss about your exhibit, he said. I won't get in the way. Henry, Leah began, but he was already turning toward the door. At the threshold, he paused and looked back. For a moment, the mask slipped, and she saw the tired man underneath, the one who had come back to Market Street expecting, foolishly, to be forgiven just for showing up. I hope this place holds you, he said, voice rougher than before. Better than I did. Then he stepped out into the bright afternoon. Leah watched the door swing shut behind him, her heart twisting painfully. She wanted to run after him, to drag him back and make him listen until something in him softened. She also wanted to let him go and never again feel that familiar sting of being told her life was small. Are you all right? Daniel asked gently. She swallowed. I will be, she said. Eventually, he nodded, respecting the space she put between them with those words. The offer stands, he said. About the exhibit. About partnership. With no obligation beyond what feels right to you. She looked at him, at the kindness in his gaze, at the steadiness that didn't demand, only invited. I'd like to try, she said. One step at a time. He smiled. That's how all good things are built. Later that night, Leah sat at her kitchen table with the contract Daniel had emailed, a pair of reading glasses perched on her nose, and a pencil in her hand. She circled clauses, wrote notes in the margins, underlined phrases that made her uneasy. It was work, but it was hers. On the fridge, tucked under a magnet, was the small note she'd written days ago. Don't let history repeat itself. She looked at it for a long time. History, she realized, didn't repeat in neat circles. It twisted, branched, offered new paths that felt eerily similar to old ones. The danger wasn't just Henry. It was her, the part of her that still leaned toward him, that still wanted the impossible combination of his intensity and the safety he'd never learned to offer. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. It's Henry. Eli gave me your contact. I shouldn't have said what I did. Your world isn't small. I'm just clumsy. And scared.
H.
She stared at the words, at the awkward admission he would rather have swallowed nails than make in person. Her heart softened, traitorous and immediate. She did not reply. Instead, she turned back to the contract, forcing herself to focus on the concrete lines of ink rather than the blurry lines between regret and hope. Across town, in his penthouse that felt more like a museum than a home, Henry sat amid an explosion of open browser tabs and catalogs. Every one of them featured flowers, moonflowers, jasmine, night-blooming cereus, nurseries that shipped nationwide, florists that specialized in impossible arrangements. If she wants small, he muttered, anger and longing tangling together, I'll show her how big I can make it for her. He began to plan, the only way he knew how, not with listening, but with grand gestures. With more. Always more. Somewhere between them, unseen, the moonflower on Leah's windowsill opened quietly to the night, indifferent to the battles of pride and affection being fought in its honor. The morning of the exhibit dawned gray and damp, as if the sky itself were undecided. Leah woke with the familiar weight in her joints and an unfamiliar flutter in her chest. The contract with the gallery lay on her kitchen table, signed in her neat, looping hand. Her moonflower painting had been picked up the day before, wrapped carefully, and carried away. The wall on Market Street where it had hung now felt strangely naked. She shuffled to the window and checked the pot on the sill. The moonflower vine had pushed out another bud during the night. It would open after dark if the weather warmed even a little. Stubborn thing, she thought, and couldn't quite tell whether she meant the plant or herself. Her phone sat on the counter, Henry's last message still unanswered. She picked it up, reread the awkward apology. Your world isn't small. I'm just clumsy. And scared. It was the kind of honesty he had once avoided like a bad investment. That alone tugged at her. She set the phone face down. Tonight is about the work, she told herself. Not about men who remember they have a heart when they're old enough to need it. The words sounded braver than she felt. By early evening, River Street shimmered with reflected light. Lanterns strung between lampposts cast warm pools onto the wet pavement. The gallery windows glowed, revealing glimpses of color and movement inside. Leah paused at the door, smoothing the front of her navy dress. It was simple but well-made. She'd bought it years ago for a school recital and taken it out of the back of the wardrobe for tonight. Her hair was pinned up, silver strands soft around her face. Inside, the space had been transformed. Daniel and his small team had worked all afternoon, arranging pieces so that they seemed to speak to each other across the walls. Old brick, old wood, new paint. The air buzzed with low conversation and the clink of glasses. At the far end of the main room, illuminated by a single, carefully aimed light, hung her moonflower. For a moment, she forgot to breathe. Against the gallery's white wall, the painting seemed larger than she remembered. The flower glowed, its petals catching the light in a way that made them look almost alive. The dark brick behind it felt deeper, the sliver of soil narrower, the bloom more defiantly placed. People were gathered in front of it, murmuring. A woman in a linen jacket gestured to the petals, saying something about resilience. A man with a cane not unlike Henry's studied the brushwork up close, his eyes damp. Leah stood at a distance, watching strangers see her memory. It felt like exposing a scar, and having people recognize not the wound, but the healing. You okay? Daniel's voice came at her elbow. She turned. He'd dressed simply, dark blazer, open-collared shirt, but there was a care in the way everything fit him that spoke of quiet intention. His eyes, as always, were kind. It's a lot, she admitted. In a good way, I hope. In a terrifying way that might be good, she said. He smiled. That's the only way anything worth doing feels. He touched her arm, a light, respectful contact. If you need to hide in the back room, we have emergency snacks. And a chair with your name on it. I'll try not to flee 5 minutes into my own exhibit, she said. But it's nice to know there's a bunker. She meant it as a joke, but the warmth in his glance lingered. It would be so easy, she thought suddenly, to lean toward that warmth. To let it teach her that not all affection came wrapped in sharp edges. The door opened. Leah didn't need to turn to know it was Henry. The shift in the room told her. The way conversations dipped, curiosity pricking at people who recognized a famous face when it walked in. Money had a way of entering before the man did. Still, when she looked, her breath hitched. He had dressed as if the night mattered. Deep charcoal suit, white shirt, no tie. The absence of the tie made him look less like a boardroom tyrant and more like the young man who had once cursed at stuck zippers and worn the same jacket all winter. But it wasn't his clothes that made the room hush. It was the street behind him. Through the open door, River Street had changed. Leah stepped forward, drawn as if by a string. Along the sidewalk, stretching as far as she could see in both directions, stood row after row of pots and planters. Not just any plants, moonflowers. Some already open, their pale petals glowing softly in the dimming light. Others still in tight buds, waiting. Vines twisted up trellises and poles, leaves rich and green. They lined the curb, crowded the base of lamp posts, clustered on the gallery steps. The air held a faint, intoxicating sweetness, like a memory she could almost taste. Oh my God, someone breathed behind her. Did he? Henry stepped aside, letting her take it in. I hope the city doesn't find me, he said lightly. Underneath the lightness, his hand clenched on the head of his cane hard enough to make his knuckles pale. Apparently, buying every moonflower within 100 miles is frowned upon by urban planners. She turned toward him slowly. You did this? She asked, though the answer was obvious. I had help, he said. And money. I'm afraid I'm still me. There was a ripple of laughter from the guests, but Leah barely heard it. Her eyes burned. It's too much, she whispered. For you? Too much doesn't exist, he said. I owed you 50 years' worth of flowers. This is the best I could do on short notice. There it was, the grand gesture she'd always secretly known he was capable of and had never received. Not when they were young and broke, not when he'd left, not in all the years since. He had mailed checks to charities, funding drives, names on plaques, but he had never given her this. Extravagance with no return, no PR angle, no strategic advantage. Just her. Emotion surged, confusing and sharp. She had told herself for decades that she would never again be moved by anything he did. That time had settled the account for good. Yet here she was, standing in a street full of flowers he'd conjured into existence because he remembered one old porch and a girl kneeling in the dirt. Henry, she said, her voice unsteady. You can't fix what happened with flowers. I know, he said softly, but I can tell you I remember. That I regret. That I'm trying, in the only stupid, enormous way I know how. He glanced away, jaw working. And, if I'm being honest, I wanted you to see what too much looks like when it's not cutting you down. The vulnerability in that admission pried something open in her that she had thought was rusted shut. For a flicker of a moment, she saw not the man who had left, but the boy who had always promised her the moon and never figured out how to deliver anything but another shift at the factory. Now, incredibly, he had brought her a piece of the moon instead. Behind her, Daniel stood in the doorway, watching quietly. His expression held no anger, only a faint sadness. He understood, Leah realized. He could see the thread that still existed between her and Henry, thin but unbroken, running back through time and hearts and mistakes. She looked at Henry again. He looked older than he had at the market, somehow, shoulders slightly slumped, eyes tired, every line on his face a ledger of nights he hadn't slept. I don't know what to do with this, she admitted, a tear finally escaping. With you. With all of it. Start by not tripping over the pots, he said, clumsy humor covering real fear. The rest we can figure out. If you want to. He hadn't asked her to forgive him. He hadn't demanded. He had simply laid the flowers at her feet, metaphorically and literally, and waited. Beside her, something inside unclenched. She reached out and took his free hand. It startled them both. The gallery seemed to hold its breath. Outside, the city went on ignoring them. The flowers scented the air. I'm tired of hating you, she said quietly. It takes too much energy, and I don't have the years left to waste on that. His fingers tightened around hers, very gently, as if afraid she'd bolt. So, what does that mean? He asked. It means, she said slowly, feeling each word before she spoke it, I'm willing to try. To see who you are now, not just who you were. No promises. No guarantees. And no contracts, he said, glancing toward the gallery. I've seen what you do to those. She smiled, shaky but real. You can't lawyer your way into my heart, Henry. I wouldn't dare, he said. You'd find the loopholes. Laughter rippled between them, soft as the petals brushing against each other in the breeze. For the rest of the evening, they orbited around each other. Daniel introduced patrons to Leah with professional warmth, praising her work without overshadowing it. Henry listened to people discuss the painting, hearing words he'd never had for what he felt when he looked at that flower: tenacity, tenderness, grief. At one point, he found himself standing next to Daniel in front of the moonflower. You did a good thing tonight, Daniel said quietly, nodding toward the street. I overdid a thing, Henry replied. It's what I'm good at. Sometimes overdoing is the only way to show you mean it, Daniel said. As long as you're not just performing for an audience. Henry looked at him, suspicious. And you? Flowers in moderation. Mostly I show up on time, Daniel said. It's less photogenic. There was no malice in his tone, and somehow that nettled Henry more than any direct challenge. She seems happy, Daniel added, glancing toward Leah, who was talking animatedly to a group of students. Happier than when she told me her history. That's something, Henry said softly, his chest loosening a fraction. By the time the lights dimmed and the last guests drifted out, Leah's feet ached and her head buzzed. The street outside was a riot of pale blossoms, glowing faintly in the darkness. Daniel helped her on with her coat. You are magnificent, he said. Your work even more so. She squeezed his hand. Thank you. For the gallery. For the wall. For not running when my past walked in with a cane. I've lived long enough to know everyone has a past with a cane, he replied. The question is who we let walk beside us now. Her heart stuttered. Henry hovered nearby, giving them space and hating every second of it. When Daniel stepped away to lock up, Henry approached. Can I walk you home? He asked. Or, at least to a taxi? She looked around at the flowers. You've done enough walking for one night, she said. I'll be fine. I'd like to, he pressed, a hint of the old insistence creeping in. It's not safe. She raised an eyebrow. Henry, I've been walking these streets for 40 years without your supervision. He bristled, then forced himself to exhale.
Right.
I'm overreaching. That's new, she muttered, then shook her head, smiling to soften it. All right, walk me as far as the diner. I want coffee that doesn't come in porcelain cups. They walked between the rows of flowers, shoulders almost brushing. For a while they were quiet, each absorbed in their own tangle of thoughts. You know, she said eventually, part of me wants to pick up one of these pots and throw it at you. He chuckled. At least I'd go down smelling nice. And another part, she went on, ignoring him, remembers planting the first ones in those ugly clay pots and thinking we were building something that would last forever. I thought that too, he said. For about 5 minutes at a time, between panicking about money.
You could have told me that, she said. Then.
Instead of deciding for both of us. I'm trying to do less deciding and more listening, he said. I'm not very good at it. No, she agreed. You're really not. He winced. Then, to his own surprise, he added, but you holding my hand back there felt like something worth learning for. She stopped walking. Don't say things like that lightly, she warned. I'm not a girl on a porch anymore. My heart doesn't bounce back the way it used to.
His voice softened.
Neither does mine. They stood under a street lamp, the flowers around them breathing their faint scent. He looked smaller here, away from his towers. Just an old man with regrets, holding on to his dignity and his cane with equal stubbornness. I want to try again, he said quietly, properly, as who we are now. Not as a man sweeping in to fix your life, but as someone who wants to be part of it if you'll have him. The words were clumsy, but the effort in them was real. She felt something inside her tip, like a scale leaning slowly toward one side. Let's see, she said. Show me who you are now. Over time, not just over flower deliveries. He nodded, swallowing. I can do that. For the first time in decades, hope, the foolish, treacherous kind, unfurled carefully inside Leah's chest. It lasted exactly 8 days. For 8 days, Henry called without overcalling, walked with her to the market without arguing about how she priced her work, listened more than he talked. Leah allowed herself, cautiously, to relax. She caught herself humming while cooking. She found his name in her phone and didn't flinch. On the 9th day, a reporter called. It's about the exhibit, the woman said. We're doing a feature on unusual philanthropic gestures. Mr. Whitmore, can you describe your intention when you flooded River Street with flowers? Leah was in the studio, cleaning brushes, when Eli burst in with his tablet. Have you seen this? He asked, eyes wide. On the local news site, a headline blazed, Millionaire magnate transforms River Street into Moonflower Wonderland for artists' big night. Underneath, photos of Henry standing among the pots, smiling that polished, public smile. The text, elegantly phrased, no doubt by his PR team, spoke of supporting local culture, reinvesting in the community, and celebrating the resilience of art in a changing city. Her name appeared halfway down the article, misspelled once. Her stomach dropped. She called Henry. I didn't know they'd run it like that, he said immediately, defensive. We just released a brief statement to manage the traffic issue. You know how it is. People see a spectacle. They want a story. And the story is about you, she said, struggling to keep her voice even. Again. It's about the gesture, he insisted. Which, forgive me, has my signature all over it. No one else could have pulled it off. And that's the problem, Henry, she said. You can't do anything without putting your signature on it. He bristled. I'm being attacked for using my resources to help you? I didn't ask you to help me, she snapped. I asked you to show up. Quietly, like Daniel does. Oh, Cole, he said, the name suddenly sour in his mouth. Saint Daniel, patron of humble artists. Don't, she warned. Don't what?
His voice sharpened.
Don't point out that he's also a millionaire playing gallery owner? Don't ask why you're so quick to forgive his money and so slow to forgive mine. Because he didn't turn my night into a press release, she shot back. Because he listens. Because he doesn't act like the world is a stage for his redemption arc. There was a beat of silence. Then he said, colder than she'd heard him in weeks, You're being ungrateful. The word hit her like a slap. Ungrateful, she repeated slowly. I poured time, money, and no small amount of dignity into making that evening special, he said. And now, because some reporter framed it a certain way, you're... Henry, she interrupted, her voice suddenly very calm. Stop talking. He faltered. I did appreciate the flowers, she said.
Deeply.
I told you that. But the second someone pointed a camera at you, you slipped right back into the man who needs to be the headline. That's not fair, he protested. It's not unfair, she said. It's accurate. You didn't even think to put my name on that statement first, did you? To say this is Leah's night, Leah's work? He said nothing. His silence told her the answer. Something in her, the part that had been leaning cautiously toward him, snapped upright. I can't do this again, she said, her throat tight. I won't spend my remaining years as a supporting character in your story. I'm too tired, Henry. And I've worked too hard to build something that's mine. Leah, be reasonable, he said, old command slipping back into his tone. You're overreacting. We can spin this. We can. She closed her eyes. There it is, she murmured. The man who thinks everything can be spun and managed. Even people. He heard the distance opening between them, felt it like a draft through a cracked window. Panic flared. Don't do this, he said, and at last the certainty drained from his voice. Don't walk away again. Not when he stumbled, then forced it out. Not when I'm trying to love you properly this time. Tears burned her eyes. The words she'd waited half a lifetime to hear had finally arrived, and they were attached to the same old patterns. I believe you love me, she said quietly.
In your way.
But your way still hurts me. He inhaled sharply. Then tell me how to change it. I'm not a boy anymore, I can. You are, she said, suddenly exhausted. You're still that boy who can't stand feeling small, who uses money and spectacle to prove he matters. I can't be the person who holds the mirror while you figure that out. So that's it. His voice rose, cracking. After everything, to be discarded again? Anger flared through her grief. I am not discarding you, she said. I am choosing myself. Something I should have done at 22, when you walked out the first time. He was silent. Henry, she said, forcing the words through her throat. I'm done. I'm leaving you again. And this time, I'm not waiting for you to come back. The line crackled softly. For a moment, she thought the call had dropped. Then he whispered, raw. Please don't. The sound of his pleading nearly undid her. Nearly. She hung up. Her hand shook as she set the phone down. She stared at it for a long time, then turned, bracing herself on the edge of the table. When the tears came, they were quiet, decades of grief and hope and fatigue leaking out at once. She pressed her forehead to her forearm, letting them fall. She did not see the moonflower bud on the windowsill begin to open in the fading light. Henry stood in the middle of his pristine kitchen, the phone still pressed to his ear long after the line had gone dead. The words echoed in his skull. I'm done. I'm leaving you again. He had thought, arrogantly, that being abandoned at 72 would feel less sharp than at 22. That experience would dull the edge. He was wrong. The pain was different only in that it had more years behind it, more proof that the problem was not the world, not bad luck, but him. He sank into a chair, the cane clattering to the floor. For a long time he simply sat there, breathing in shallow gasps, his chest tight. Old fear crawled up his spine, fear of being alone, of being irrelevant, of dying with no one at his bedside but a nurse paid overtime. He thought of the street full of flowers, of Leah's hand in his, of the way her laugh had sounded under the lanterns. He thought of how easily he had let pride and habit snatch all that away, again. When he finally moved, it was with the desperation of a man who has realized, too late, that the deal on the table is the only one that ever truly mattered. He called. No answer. He texted. No reply. The next morning, Leah opened her door to find the hallway choked with flowers. Moonflowers, roses, jasmine, pots of lavender, armfuls of wildflowers in messy, glorious abundance. Bouquets leaned against her doorframe, arrangements sat in boxes. A ridiculous arch of blossoms had somehow been erected over the entrance to her building. Her neighbors' doors were open, faces peering out in amusement and annoyance. Looks like someone sorry, Mrs. Patel from 3B said, chuckling. Leah closed her eyes for a moment, overwhelmed by the scent, by the spectacle, by the sheer, infuriating Henry-ness of it. There was a note taped to her door. I don't know how to be small, it read. But I am learning that I may have to lose you to figure it out. Please don't make me learn it without you.
H.
Tears prickled again. She stepped carefully around the flowers, picking her way toward the stairs.
Leah.
Mrs. Patel called. You're not going to keep any of these? Leah paused, hand on the banister. She reached down, picked up a single, modest pot of moonflowers, the smallest one among the lavish displays. This one, she said. The rest, please, everyone take what you like. Hospitals might need some. Shelters. Anyone really. Let them go where they'll be appreciated as themselves, not as apologies. She carried the small pot inside, set it gently on the table beside her own vine, and sat down. Her phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. Saw the article. Are you all right? She stared at the screen, at the simple question with no demands attached. After a moment, she typed back.
No.
But I'm getting there.
Can we talk?
His reply came almost immediately.
Anytime.
I'm on my way. And for the record, your night was always yours, no matter who tried to put their name on it. She exhaled, some of the tightness in her chest easing. As she waited for the knock on the door, Leah glanced at the 2 pots of moonflowers on her table, one grown slowly under her care, one brought in a rush of remorse. Between them, for the first time, she began to imagine a future that did not revolve around fixing old hurts, but building something new. She did not know, yet, that the man she had just refused would not accept defeat quietly, or that the quiet man on his way up the stairs was already, unwittingly, part of a contest neither of them fully understood. She only knew that for this moment, she had chosen herself, and that choice, after a lifetime of waiting, felt like sunlight on petals that had only ever bloomed at night. Daniel arrived at Leah's apartment with a bag of pastries and the kind of knock that didn't insist, just waited. She let him in wearing an old sweater and paint-stained pants, eyes puffy from too many different kinds of crying. The 2 pots of moonflowers sat on the table between them like opposing witnesses, one grown slowly, one delivered in a rush. I read the article, he said, setting the bag down. And I saw the flowers in the hallway. Of course you did, she muttered. The whole building saw them. Mrs. Patel thinks I'm starring in a soap opera. He smiled gently. You could do worse. She sank into a chair. I told him I was done, she said. I meant it. At least one part of me did. And the other part? Daniel asked quietly. She looked at the moonflowers. The other part is tired of feeling 16 every time he walks into a room. He didn't rush to fill the silence. He just sat, hands wrapped around his coffee cup, giving her space. I'm not going to tell you what to feel about Henry, he said at last. That's a road you know better than anyone. But I am going to tell you this. What he did with the article.
That wasn't about you.
That was about his fear. And fear makes people loud. You're very kind to someone who just took over your gallery in the press, she said, a wry edge to her voice. It's still your exhibit, he replied. Everyone who walked into that room knew it, even the ones who pretended they didn't. She swallowed. You sound very sure. I watched them, he said simply. They weren't looking at him when they cried. They were looking at your flower. Her throat tightened. He reached across the table, not to take her hand, but to touch the rim of the pot nearest him. I like this one, he said. The crooked leaf at the back. The way it reached for the window before it even knew what was out there. He wasn't talking about the plant, and she knew it. Slowly, she turned her hand so her fingers brushed his. He didn't grip, didn't pull, just let the contact exist. Daniel, she said, voice low, I don't know what I can offer anyone right now. A conversation, he said. A walk. Maybe, if we're both feeling reckless, a movie where we fall asleep halfway through. She laughed, the sound wet but real. You set the bar very low. Experience has taught me it's easier to raise it together than to fail spectacularly alone, he said. It began like that, small things. Coffee that turned into walks. Walks that turned into evenings at the gallery after closing, the 2 of them sitting on the floor with their backs against the wall, talking about nothing and everything. He told her about the years he'd spent chasing returns before realizing he was losing something less measurable. She told him about students who painted their way out of grief. Once, as they locked up, his hand brushed hers, then settled more firmly. Is this all right? He asked. She listened inwardly, testing the answer.
It was.
It was warm and calm, and did not make her feel like she was standing on the edge of a cliff. Yes, she said. It's all right. They kissed for the first time in the half-lit gallery, surrounded by canvases. It was gentle, tentative, carrying with it all the awareness of their years. Old hearts, old scars, new risk. There was no rush, no dizzy spin, just a sense of something unfolding at a pace her bones could keep up with. For the first time in a long time, Leah let herself fall without bracing for impact. Henry, meanwhile, learned what silence sounded like when it had finality in it. Her phone stayed unreachable. The market stall was staffed by Eli and another student. Leah was working on a new series, Eli said carefully whenever Henry appeared, questions in his eyes. Is she all right? Henry asked one such morning, trying to sound casual and missing by miles. She says she is, Eli replied. That usually means she's drawing the pain, so it doesn't eat her. He hesitated, then added, She asked me to tell you the flowers went to good homes. Hospitals, shelters, the nursing center on 12th. People loved them. Henry imagined his apology bouquets being dismantled, redistributed, made useful. It was simultaneously humbling and right. He went home with his hands empty and his head full. For the first time in his life, he did something he would have mocked in a younger man. He called a therapist whose card had been gathering dust in his drawer since his doctor insisted a year ago. I keep losing the same woman, he said in the first session. And I think I might be the common denominator. The therapist, a calm woman with gray hair and patient eyes, did not congratulate him for his insight. She simply nodded. All right, she said. Let's look at how you behave when you're afraid. It was not a quick process. Henry discovered ugly truths about himself. How quickly he reached for spectacle when he felt small, how deeply he equated love with control, how rarely he had allowed himself to be seen without a headline attached. Slowly, painfully, he practiced different choices. Small ones at first. When he donated to the community center, he did it anonymously. When a reporter called about another project, he declined to comment and suggested they talk to the people actually running it. He started showing up at the market not as a benefactor, but as a pair of hands. Hold this, Eli said one windy afternoon, shoving a tent pole toward him. And don't boss me. Henry held the pole. He did not boss. Later, Eli handed him a cup of coffee. You're less annoying like this, the young man observed. What's this? Henry asked dryly. Standing still, Eli said. Not trying to buy the street. The word should have stung. Instead, Henry felt a strange lightness. He didn't see Leah for weeks. When he finally did, it was at the gallery. He hadn't planned it. He'd come to drop off a quiet donation for the roof fund, a check with no name on it, in an envelope addressed simply to whoever's tired of buckets on rainy days. He meant to leave it on the desk and slip out. But as he stepped inside, he heard her laugh. She stood with Daniel near the moonflower painting, now part of a permanent collection. Daniel's hand rested lightly at her back as they discussed a student's work. Leah's hair was loose today, silver haloed by the track lights. She looked content. Not dazzled, not breathless, simply at ease in her skin and in the space. The sight was both wonderful and unbearable. He could have turned and left. The old Henry would have. Pride would have insisted. Instead, he cleared his throat. They turned. Leah's expression flickered, from surprise to caution to something more complicated. Daniel's lips thinned for a second, then relaxed. Henry, Leah said. I didn't expect to see you here. I won't stay, he said quickly. I just came to drop this off. He held up the envelope. For the leaks. Consider it repayment for all the roofs I never helped patch when we were young. Daniel's eyes widened slightly. That's generous, he said. But we can't accept. It's anonymous, Henry interrupted. If anyone asks, tell them it was a guilty conscience with very tidy handwriting. He set the envelope on the counter, then turned to go. Wait, Leah said. He stopped. She stepped closer, searching his face. Something about his posture struck her as new. The shoulders not quite so squared, the chin not quite so lifted. He looked smaller, in a way that didn't diminish him, but made him more human. You look tired, she said softly. I'm learning to be small, he replied with a crooked smile. Turns out it's heavy work. She huffed a laugh despite herself. Daniel glanced between them, reading the air. I'll check on the piece in the back, he said. Take your time. He walked away, leaving them in the hush of the main room. "How are you?" Henry asked, hands tucked into his coat pockets like a man keeping himself from reaching out.
Angry, she said. Sad. Busy.
"Painting more than I have in years." "That sounds like you," he said. "All of it." She studied him. "I saw what you did with the community center," she said. "They mentioned a donation that fell off a truck. That's your phrase."
He winced.
"I'm losing my touch."
"It was good," she said.
"Quiet. Useful. Without your name on it." He swallowed. "I'm trying to do things that matter even if no one claps." "Hard for you," she said. "Excruciating," he admitted. "But I'm finding that the more I do it, the less my skin itches." Her lips quirked. Then her expression sobered. "I meant what I said," she reminded him. "About leaving. About choosing myself." "I know," he said. "I'm not here to win you back with another stunt." He took a breath, each word chosen carefully. "I'm here because loving you, quietly, from a distance if I have to, is still better than the life I had without it. I can't compete anymore, Leah. Not with him." He nodded toward the back room where Daniel had disappeared. "Not with your work. Not with your own sense of worth. I'm done trying to be the headline." The surrender in those words was unlike anything she'd ever heard from him. It landed somewhere deep inside her, where old hurt and old love were tangled in stubborn knots. "You're right," she said slowly. "You can't compete anymore." He flinched, but didn't look away. "And neither can he," she added. He blinked.
"What?"
She glanced toward the back. "Daniel is good.
Steady.
He's been patient with me in ways I didn't know how to ask for. For a while, I thought choosing him would be the safe answer, the reasonable choice." A tiny fissure opened in Henry's chest. "And it isn't?" "It is," she said. "But I realized something while I was trying to fit myself into that safety." She stepped closer, close enough now that he could see the small scar near her eyebrow he'd always loved. "I want the rest of my life to be calm," she said. "But I don't want it to be half-lived. And like it or not, Henry Whitmore, some wild part of me wakes up around you that never quite woke up around anyone else." He stared at her, breath caught. "That is not a compliment," she added dryly. "It's a warning." He huffed out a startled laugh. "I'll take it," he said, voice rough. "I told Daniel," she went on, "that I care for him, that I could probably build something warm and beautiful and steady with him." And he looked at me for a long time. Then he said, "You still look toward the door when you talk about your past." Henry's eyes stung. "He said he loved me enough," she said, "not to want to be the man standing between me and where my heart kept turning. He said he'd rather be my friend than the safe choice I resented later." "That idiot," Henry whispered, voice cracking. "That decent man," she corrected, "who still runs this gallery and still cares about my work and will probably yell at you if you start throwing your weight around again." He swallowed. "So, where does that leave us?"
She took a breath.
This, she knew, was the real choice, not between two men, but between the woman she had been and the one she was trying to be. "It leaves us here," she said. "Two old fools with not that many years left, trying to see if we can finally do this without destroying each other." His eyes shone. "Is that are you?" "I am not promising happily ever after," she said. "I'm promising this. I am willing to try again. On conditions." "Name them," he said immediately. She held up a finger. "No press releases about anything you do for me. Ever." "Done," he said. "Second," she continued, "you don't get to decide what small means in my life. If I say a market stall is enough, it's enough. If I say a gallery wall is enough, it's enough. You can offer, but you cannot push." He nodded, throat working. "Agreed." "Third," she said, voice softening, "you stop using money every time you feel scared. You tell me you're scared, even if it makes you feel small." He exhaled shakily. "That one might kill me." "Then we'll go together," she said. "But we'll go honest." A tear escaped down his cheek. He let it fall, without wiping it away. "And," she added, because she knew herself, "if you start to turn me into a supporting character in your redemption story, I walk. No arguments, no flowers, no begging." We're too old for third chances. He met her gaze, seeing that she meant it. I don't want a third chance, he said quietly. I want this one. And I want you not as proof that I've changed, but as the person who keeps me changing. She smiled then, small and fierce. You really have been going to therapy. Don't tell anyone, he said. It'll ruin my reputation. She stepped forward. This time, when she took his hand, there was no audience, no moonlit street lined with grand gestures. Just two worn hands finding each other in a room that smelled faintly of dust and paint. I missed you, she admitted, voice breaking. I've missed you all my life, he said. They stood like that for a long time, neither rushing what time would rush for them soon enough. Months later, spring came reluctantly to the city. At the edge of a small community garden, built on a lot Henry had once planned to develop and now, astonishingly, had donated without putting his name on the sign, two older figures knelt in the dirt. Your back is going to hate you tomorrow, Leah said, pressing a seed into the soil. My back hates me every day, Henry replied. At least this way, it has a reason. Rows of young moonflower vines stretched along the fence, their tendrils just beginning to curl upward. Eli painted a sign nearby. Daniel argued good-naturedly with a group of teenagers about where to put benches. Mrs. Patel had brought samosas. Community, Leah thought, watching them all. Not as a word in a speech, but as people with dirt under their nails and stories on their tongues. Henry grunted as he straightened, one hand pressed to his lower back. Remind me why we didn't hire professionals for this? Because we're reinventing ourselves as humble gardeners, Leah said. And because you're trying to impress me with actual work instead of invoices. Is it working? He asked. She looked at him, at the man who'd once walked out of her life because he couldn't bear feeling small, now kneeling in the dirt beside her, his expensive shoes ruined. Yes, she said simply. It is. That night, as the sky darkened, the first of the new moonflowers opened along the fence. Leah and Henry walked there together, fingers interlaced, the scent wrapping around them like an old, familiar promise that had finally learned to keep itself. Do you ever think, he murmured, about what would have happened if I'd stayed the first time? Sometimes, she admitted. But then I look at us now, and I think maybe we needed to be stupid before we could be kind. He rested his forehead briefly against hers.
Thank you, he said.
For what? She asked. For leaving me, he said, so I could learn how to come back properly. She smiled, blinking back the tears that came so easily these days and hurt less than they once had. Don't make a habit of it, she said. I'm too old to keep teaching you the same lesson. I'm a slow learner, he said, but I'm very motivated. They laughed, the sound mingling with the quiet of the garden and the faint city noise beyond the fence. Under the pale blossoms, in the soft, ordinary magic of a shared evening, Leah realized that the wild part of her that had always woken in Henry's presence was no longer at war with the part that wanted peace. For the first time, they felt like the same thing. The moonflowers, stubborn and luminous, opened wider, as if, having waited half a century for this, they intended to witness every last moment of it.